Hi everyone, and welcome to Lesson 3 in Writing a Novel. Today, we are going to take our novel idea and expand it from a premise into an outline of the whole story using the hero's journey plot structure, which is also known as the monomyth. Novels are extremely flexible. You can use them to tell most any kind of story, which is exciting on one hand and terrifying on the other. How do you go about shaping a story so that it stays engaging for those 60,000 to 120,000 words that make up a typical novel? This is where the monomyth story structure can help us. Almost all stories that humans are drawn to unfold in a similar way, one that mimics how events play out in our own lives. Understanding how that structure works will help us come up with the most important scenes in our stories, creating a roadmap of milestones for us to write toward. Following this structure will give our stories direction and make them feel balanced and cohesive. And far from constraining our stories or making them formulaic, structuring them around the monomyth can unlock their deep potential and organize their events in a way that will deeply resonate with readers. The idea that stories have an organic structure has been around for thousands of years. Aristotle wrote Poetics in 335 BCE, and it's one of the earliest surviving works on storytelling theory. Aaron Sorkin is an Academy Award-winning screenwriter, and he has this to say about Poetics. There is a tendency to think that art is finally a place where there are no rules, where you have complete freedom. I'm going to sit down at the keyboard and it's just going to flow out of me onto the paper, and it's going to be pure art. No, what you're describing is finger painting. Rules are what make art beautiful. The rulebook is the Poetics by Aristotle. All the rules are there. Now, I've tried to read Poetics a couple of times, and it's tedious. All the rules might be in here, but it's a slog to understand them. Fast forward a couple thousand years to 1949, and Joseph Campbell published A Hero with 1,000 Faces, which examines the universal structure of stories and myths. George Lucas credits this book as an inspiration for Star Wars, and it had a profound effect on many other storytellers. I've also tried to read this book numerous times, and I just can't do it. The rules might all be in here, but it is so boring. Apparently, it was also so boring that Disney screenwriters couldn't read it. So Christopher Vogler wrote a memo for Disney Studios that outlined the lessons from The Hero with 1,000 Faces. That memo influenced Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, and many other films. Thankfully for us, Christopher Vogler expanded his memo into the writer's journey, mythic structure for writers. The rules are in here, and they are blessedly easy to understand. I will only recommend a few craft books during this whole series, and the writer's journey is one of them, so make sure to grab yourself a copy as soon as possible. Another story structure book that I highly recommend is The Anatomy of Story, 22 Steps to Becoming a Master Storyteller by John Truby. It's a bit more advanced than the writer's journey, so I'd say pick it up when you're feeling ready for advanced study. In the last episode, I said that I would use this 22-step story structure to help outline my story, but I've decided to just stick with the hero's journey for now. But I'll definitely reference this book in future episodes. Christopher Vogler lays out the hero's journey in 3 acts that are broken down into 12 stages. Act 1 has 5 stages: Ordinary World, Call to Adventure, Refusal of the Call, Meeting with the Mentor, and Crossing the First Threshold. The first act takes around 1/4 of a book or a screenplay's pages to cover those stages. Act 2 revolves around tests, allies, and enemies, the approach to the Inmost cave, the ordeal, and the reward. This act is about twice as long as the first, taking up around half of the total page count. Act 3 covers the road back, resurrection, and return with the Elixir. This act consumes the last 1/4 of the page count and contains the climax and the final scenes that establish a new ordinary world that has been healed or somehow transformed by the events in the story. So, I'm going to start outlining my story at the very beginning. A very good place to start. I'll explain a bit about each stage as I go, but if you want more details as you're working on your outline, the writer's journey starts with a practical guide that covers each stage in about half a page or so. The rest of the book goes into detail about archetype characters and then a full chapter explaining each stage of the hero's journey. It's all worth reading, but you can start outlining your story right now even with limited knowledge of these stages. Outlining my story wasn't an easy process. It's taken me more than a month of working on it pretty much every day and agonizing over certain stages in order to come up with that first draft outline. It was a messy process. I wrote ideas down, I would throw them out later, and I got to feel a good blend of anxiety and doubt and imposter syndrome along the way. You'll probably have a similar experience. I still think that my story needs work, but as long and difficult as this step was, I think it was worth it. I now have a rough outline of the whole story that builds organically toward a climax, and what I hope is a satisfying resolution. Now that I have a roadmap to follow, I'm ready to start writing my novel, and that's what I'm going to start doing in the next episode. Okay, before we start outlining, let's look at our premise again to make sure we know what story we're trying to tell. Here's my rather wordy first draft of the premise that I came up with in the previous episode. Now, let's use the stages of the hero's journey to expand this premise into a rough outline. The first stage is the ordinary world. In this stage, we want to show the normal world that the protagonist or the hero occupies before the call to adventure prompts the protagonist to leave that ordinary world and venture into the special world of the story. Since I just made a Sound of Music reference, let's use that story as an example. The film opens with Maria singing and dancing in the mountains, and also going about her life as a nun in the abbey. This is her ordinary, everyday world. The movie also starts with a song, establishing, in a way, the ordinary world of the movie itself, letting the audience know that this is a musical. The Hunger Games starts with Katniss slipping out to hunt in a restricted zone near her house, giving the reader a glimpse of an average day for Katniss living in this dystopian world. Star Wars starts with Darth Vader kidnapping Princess Leia from her spaceship, establishing the ordinary world of a space opera story, and then it shows us Luke Skywalker's ordinary world as a moisture farmer on Tatooine. Even though the ordinary world is the first stage of the hero's journey, that doesn't mean that your first scene must start in the ordinary world of the protagonist. Right now, I'm thinking the very first scene of my novel will be an extremely short prologue, maybe just 1 or 2 pages, that captures the moment when Fermi and other physicists are talking at Los Alamos about the high probability that alien life has evolved elsewhere. It was during that conversation that Fermi blurted out, "But where is everyone?" That question became known as the Fermi paradox, and I plan to end the scene with that question. I want my first real chapter to be set at the Svalbard seed vault in Norway. A scientist is there doing research on seed preservation and is quickly killed when the aliens show up to rob the place. Written well, this chapter will be short, evocative, and mysterious. It will raise questions in the minds of the readers, and then I'll delay answering those questions, which is one of the keys to creating suspense. These 2 scenes will form the ordinary world of my novel. They'll make the promise to the reader that this story will take you around the world to unique locations populated with interesting people. You'll learn cool stuff. Wild things will happen, and you will be thrilled and intellectually stimulated. I mean, hopefully. After that, I'll move to the ordinary world of my protagonist. I won't be reading the rest of my outline out loud because that would take forever. So pause the video if you'd like to see what I wrote for each stage. Now that we have opened the novel with a bang and then established the ordinary world of the protagonist, we are ready for stage 2 in the hero's journey, which is the call to adventure. This is an event or an invitation that calls on a protagonist to leave their ordinary world and enter the special world of the story. In detective novels, it's a new case. In romances, it's meeting someone new. In The Sound of Music, this occurs when Maria is asked to be the governess for the Von Trapp family. In Star Wars, it's Princess Leia's desperate plea for help. Right now, I'm thinking that Kelsey will be called out of her ordinary world by Robert Valdez, a former Air Force officer who is now a brigadier general in the Space Force. Pause the video if you'd like to read the details. The third stage of the hero's journey is the refusal of the call. This is an important step because the call to adventure asks your hero to leave their ordinary world that they're comfortable in and face the difficult unknown. This will bring up a lot of legitimate fears in your protagonist, and it will feel very realistic for the protagonist to refuse that call to adventure, or at least accept it with great reluctance. In The Sound of Music, Maria doesn't want to leave the Abbey. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker refuses to go with Obi-Wan Kenobi until after the Empire murders his aunt and uncle. In Up, the old man refused the call of adventure his whole life until it was almost too late. Your protagonist should explain why he's refusing the call and detail his fears out loud, or should at least think about them so that the reader knows what the protagonist is afraid of. And keep in mind when outlining the story that those fears should come true. Your hero will be confronted with great challenges, both the foreseen and unforeseen, and the protagonist should be pushed to his limits. He should be afraid of the adventure, and the adventure shouldn't disappoint by being tepid. Of course, this depends somewhat on genre. If you're writing a sweet Christian romance, maybe don't make all of your protagonist's worst fears come true. But I'm writing a thriller, so I'll be looking for ways to creatively push my characters to their breaking points. Part of the appeal of thrillers is seeing how human beings handle the absolute most difficult circumstances. In my story, Kelsey doesn't feel qualified and fears that she would make some mistake that could lead to war and needless death, which are her worst fears. Stage 4 is meeting with the mentor. The purpose of the mentor is to help the protagonist prepare to face the challenges of the story. This is one of the most rich and common themes in mythology, and if you think about your favorite stories, I'll bet that most all of them have a strong mentor dynamic. In The Sound of Music, it's the Reverend Mother who counsels Maria and encourages her to cross the threshold into the special world of the story. In Star Wars, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. I recently rewatched Dune, and Paul Atreides has multiple mentors in his mother, father, Gurney, Duncan Idaho, even the Bene Gesserit truthsayer. Harry Potter has multiple teachers that show him how to be a wizard and guide him as he grows up. In my story, Kelsey will have several mentors who will help her over the course of the story. Stage 5 is crossing the first threshold. Vogler breaks down the 3 acts of a story in this way. Act 1 is the hero's decision to act. Act 2 is the action itself, and Act 3 is the consequences of the action. Crossing the first threshold is the transition from Act 1 to Act 2. The hero has accepted the call to adventure and steps out of her ordinary world into the special world. Maria leaves the Abbey and arrives at the Von Trapp estate. Luke Skywalker travels with Obi-Wan Kenobi to the Mos Eisley Cantina. In the movie Up, the old man inflates the balloons and his house lifts off, and he pursues that adventure that he and his wife has always wanted to go on. In my story, Kelsey agrees to join General Valdez's team, and she crosses the first threshold as she's transported to the Cheyenne Mountain Station, which is tunneled under 2,000 feet of solid granite deep in the Colorado mountains. After crossing the first threshold into the special world, the protagonist will face new challenges and tests. She will also meet allies, enemies, and must learn the rules of the special story world. In Star Wars, Casablanca, the Top Gun movies, Westerns, and in many other stories, these scenes often start taking place in bars and cantinas. In other stories, these scenes are kind of spread out as the hero travels through the story world. In my story, these scenes will start taking place at the Cheyenne Mountain Station. Kelsey will be immediately confronted by government and military officials who think that she is too young, that she doesn't have the right qualifications, and who think that a peaceful approach to the aliens is insane to begin with. She will need to use all of her tact and tenacity to advocate for her approach. General Valdez will also have to justify his decisions to the Joint Chiefs, the President, and to other allied nations who have their own ideas of what should be done. Kelsey and the U.S. government team face many tests during this stage. Here are a few that I've thought up for this section. The 7th stage is the approach to the Inmost cave. In this stage, the hero prepares to enter a dangerous place, often the headquarters of the antagonist, where she will encounter great peril. Vogler gives several examples. In Orpheus, the hero descends into hell to rescue a loved one. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker and his friends get sucked into the Death Star, where they rescue Princess Leia and confront Darth Vader. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy is kidnapped into the witch's castle, and her friends have to slip in to save her. This stage covers all of the preparations, planning, and execution of the plan to get into the dangerous place, where in the next stage, the hero will confront death, either physically or metaphorically. So, I've had trouble thinking up what would work for this stage in my story. If the alien fleet, or whatever they came in on, is at Lagrange Point 1, or anywhere in that area, it would take forever for Kelsey to travel there, and that would feel unrealistic for the world to pull off a manned deep space mission on short notice. I thought about maybe skipping or modifying this stage, but after thinking about it for a few days, I think Kelsey's story needs for her to try a massive effort at diplomacy. After all, her great desire is to prevent conflict that leads to needless death, and a war with advanced alien technology seems to promise a lot of casualties. I want her character to make a massive effort and take huge risks to stop the conflict through peaceful means. The idea finally occurred to me that the aliens could have created an advanced operations base closer to Earth and used their chameleon-like shielding technology that hid the rescue craft to make their ships invisible. Here are the events that I've thought up for this stage. Stage 8 is the Ordeal. This stage is where the hero's greatest fears are realized. It is often a moment when the hero faces physical death or the psychological death of his journey to achieve his goal. This is also where the hero becomes a hero, by taking action and meeting the forces of darkness head on. The hero will encounter death and will be reborn. The consequences are profound, and he will never be the same. In Star Wars, it's when Luke Skywalker gets sucked under the water by the monster in the trash compactor. In romances, it's when the couple breaks up and reconciliation seems impossible. In The Sound of Music, it's when Maria learns that the captain has gotten engaged to the Baroness, and she decides that she will return to the Abbey as soon as her replacement can be found. Vogler talks about how this is a critical stage with a lot of symbolic power. The hero dies and must be reborn, and in a similar way, the reader experiences a sense of loss and depression, which turns into a vicarious feeling of triumph when the hero is reborn. This stage is also important because without it, your story won't feel like it's reached the height of its drama. If the event in your story doesn't carry your hero to the brink of physical or psychological death, then it's failing to tap into its true potential. What if in The Old Man and the Sea, the old man caught a big fish just outside the harbor, reeled it in without difficulty, and returned to shore without incident? It might still be an enjoyable story with Hemingway's gorgeous prose, but the story's true power comes from the protagonist pushing himself to the absolute limit in his battle with the sea, with the fish, and with the sharks on his return journey. The hero faces death physically, metaphorically, and emotionally, and he survives, giving the readers the vicarious pleasure of surviving with him. This stage also shows the strength of your hero's great desire. Your hero must really believe in that great desire in order to pursue it to the brink of death. In my story, this will happen when Kelsey and her crew make it to the alien command ship. Stage 9 is called Reward or Seizing the Sword. After the hero has faced death and survived the ordeal, he or she escapes with a reward or the object of the quest. In heist stories, it's the money or art or whatever is being stolen. Part of the reward in The Sound of Music is revealed by the title. The Von Trapps embrace music, which brings the rewards of healing, joy, and reconciliation to the family. The old man finally kills the huge marlin and straps it to the side of his boat for the return to shore. Luke Skywalker rescues Princess Leia and escapes with plans for the Death Star. The reward can also be knowledge or wisdom that will help the hero finish their quest and complete her personal transformation. At this point in the story, there may also be a reconciliation between the hero and a parent figure. Often there are scenes of celebration and reflection for having survived that ordeal and escaped death. In romance, there's usually a love scene. I haven't figured out yet what the exact reward will be in my story, but here are a couple of possibilities. Stage 10 is the road back. The hero has seized the sword, stolen fire from the gods. There are consequences. The vengeful forces of the antagonists pursue the hero as she crosses the threshold into Act 3 and begins the journey back to the ordinary world. This comes after Indiana Jones has stolen the artifact and is chased by Nazis and other bad guys. In The Sound of Music, the Von Trapp family is also chased by Nazis as they try to escape. The old man battles sharks that try to eat the big fish. Darth Vader chases Luke and his team through the Death Star, and Obi-Wan Kenobi sacrifices himself to help facilitate their escape. Here are a few ideas from my story. Stage 11 is Resurrection. This is where the events of the story reach climax, and the hero again faces death in a final showdown with the antagonistic forces. This is also where the hero's character arc reaches a critical fork in the road, and he will be forced to make a decision between staying the same or embracing what he has learned through the crucible of the story and becoming a new person. By choosing a new way, he demonstrates that the old man has died and is resurrected to the newness of life. Vogler provides an illustration of how the hero's character arc unfolds alongside the stages of the hero's journey. During the resurrection stage, which is the climax of the story, the hero also reaches the climax of her character arc, which is to make a final attempt at meaningful change. In The Sound of Music, the Von Trapps are chased by Nazis, and the captain is held at gunpoint in front of his family, where he fully rejects the call to join the Nazis, and he chooses peace. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker and the Rebels engage in a final battle against the Empire, and in the decisive moment, Luke chooses to trust the Force's guidance to fire his kill shot. In Up, Muntz and his attack dogs seem to have the good guys trapped, but the old man Carl chooses to let his treasured home and possessions go in order to save Russell and Kevin. In my story, Kelsey seems to have given up on peace and has turned to war, which feels like a fundamental violation of her own moral code. But at this stage, she will return to her convictions and use the classic diplomatic technique of back-channeling to try to bring about peace one last time. Stage 12 is Return with the Elixir. The protagonist has gone through a long journey in the special story world, and now it's time to return to the ordinary world. But for the journey to have been worthwhile, the hero needs to bring something of value back to that ordinary world. It could literally be a magical elixir that will bring healing to the ordinary world, or it may be some other kind of treasure or wisdom that the hero brings back. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker has defeated Darth Vader in his Death Star, bringing hope and at least temporary peace to the galaxy. In Up, Carl finally went on the adventure that he and his wife put off their whole lives, and on that journey he learned to let go of her memory enough so that he can find joy in life again. In The Sound of Music, the family escapes Austria with only the clothes on their backs, but through music, they've rediscovered joy and have grown closer together. In my story, the alien attack will grow in intensity for a time, until it suddenly stops and the alien ships retreat. Hours later, NASA detects that the sun is returning to full strength, meaning that the sun shields must be moving out of the way. Well, that's my first draft of a story outline for my novel. It's hard for me to tell yet if it's any good, but the important thing is that I'm excited about it and I want to keep working on it. In the next episode, I'm going to start writing my manuscript. I feel ready to write actual pages because I now have a roadmap of important scenes and events that I can write toward. So for me at least, this long and difficult process of creating a hero's journey outline was very helpful. From now on, each time I drop a new episode, I'll post all of the pages that I've written in their first draft form on my website. So that way you can see how I'm taking this outlining and turning it into a manuscript. There's also a lot more craft techniques to cover, and in each episode I'll tackle a different topic. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can follow the rest of the journey. You're also welcome to ask questions in the comments, and I'll do my best to either answer them directly or cover them in future episodes. Until next time, keep writing.